Like Ty said, our last day of Joseph, we have, I've really enjoyed this series. It's just been a really cool journey. And honestly, it's been walking with some things in my life that make me, want to hold on even more to the way that sometimes when you're going through it and when things are hard, when things are difficult, when the struggle is real, it's easy to think, well, maybe God's just abandoned me here. Maybe I'm on my own. Maybe I made him angry or I messed up and now he's punishing me for my waywardness. And yet we see in Joseph's life over and over again, one of the themes that we've been looking at is how no matter how bad it gets, even when things were like bad and then they go from bad to worse, it's like one of those movies where everything, just keeps going wrong more and more and more. And you're just kind of like, when is this going to turn around? Because I want something good to happen to this character. But we still see in all of these moments that there's this little tag that comes back, a refrain over and over. And God was with him. And God was with him. And so hopefully you've been encouraged, whatever you're going through, whatever your life is facing right now, that just because it's hard or just because it doesn't seem to be getting better or turning around, that God is with you and he's present in your situation. He's present with you. Another theme that we've kind of been looking at is this idea that God is able to use difficult things. He's able to use our suffering and the stuff that we go through. And even sometimes when we are traumatized or victimized by other people or by situations, he's able to use that to bring about something really beautiful and to actually bring a lot of good into the world through really difficult situations. And we know this, but it doesn't always click with our life, right? We know this because think about how many organizations there are in the world, like nonprofits. My wife works for a nonprofit. They do good work with kids who have medical needs, and they have to travel out of state for care. And it was born out of a situation of heartbreak because of the loss of a child. And that inspired, the parents and the family of that child to step up and to say, you know what, let's make something good out of this. I guess we're wearing the lemons shirt, so we can do the, take lemons and make lemonade kind of thing, right? But yeah, I worked it in there. But honestly, how many incredible things are done, but they're born out of hardship. They're born out of sorrow. They're born out of loss. And so what we see in this story with Joseph is that in the same way that he, suffered and went through things and was traumatized, that actually it brings about incredible good. And so, just to encourage us that, when you're going through it, God is with you, but also when you're going through it, be a little bit curious. What is God doing in that situation? What does he want to do through that situation? What good and what salvation? And I don't mean salvation like the way Jesus saves us, but I mean salvation the way in this story that Joseph, through the story and through his obedience to God, that he ends up storing up all these crops in Egypt that then ends up saving even not just Egyptians who were hungry in a famine, but also throughout the nations surrounding. They all came there to be saved because of what Joseph had been through. And so just this idea that God is able to bring redemptive things and make do really powerful things through really difficult circumstances. So be a little bit curious. If you're up against it, if you're like, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, what might God be doing? What might God be working that can then turn into something that is redemptive and does good in this world? And so if you haven't been with us, I've just run you really quick through the story. Joseph, we know he's the favorite son of his dad, and that made his brothers jealous. And so one day they had the opportunity when they were kind of out working in the field to decide what they wanted to do with Joseph, and they decided they were going to throw him in a pit, and they thought about killing him. They decided not to. They sold him into slavery, which is, maybe better, maybe worse. It just depends how the slavery goes. But the slavery actually went pretty well. He landed on his feet in a wealthy person's house, and he worked hard, and he excelled and did well, and but pretty soon he caught the eye of his owner's wife, and she accused him of raping her when he denied her advances. And so then, because of that, he is thrown in prison. And so he goes from the pit to a slave to in prison. He interprets some dreams, and the people who he helped gets out of prison, and he's like, hey, remember, don't forget about me because I helped you, and I'm a helpful guy, and don't leave me here. But they forget, and they leave him there, and he's left in prison. But eventually they remember, and he has the chance to interpret a dream for Pharaoh, and he interprets it, and Pharaoh is so impressed by his gift that he actually puts him in charge. And the dream was just what I talked about earlier, that there was going to be a famine, and that Egypt needed to plant extra crops and harvest and save so that when the famine came, they would have enough to weather the storm. And so they do that, and Joseph gets put in charge of that. He becomes like second in Egypt, only to Pharaoh. So he's like number 2. And he does an incredible job of his preparation, and it ends up that there's enough food to feed Egypt and to help the people around. And this kind of comes back around because, like James talked about last week, eventually Joseph's brothers and his family back in Canaan, they experienced the famine too, and now they're out of food and they need food. And so where do they come? They come to Egypt. And so here comes the moment, where now Joseph is faced with his past, and he's faced with his brothers, and he has the power. And we saw last week that Joseph, he wasn't quite sure what to do because he didn't know if his brothers were kind of the same brothers that had thrown him in the pit and sold him into slavery, or if they had changed and grown and become, better people, let's say. And so he didn't know if he could trust them or if he could reveal himself. But as we saw last week, he ran some tests to kind of try to figure it out, and eventually he revealed himself to them, and they, he worked through the trauma of the experience that he'd gone through, and he got to a point where he could forgive. He could open himself back up to relationship with his brothers, and that's kind of where we're going to pick up the story today. So Pharaoh actually hears about Joseph's brothers, and he thinks this is pretty cool. He's like, oh, what? Your brothers are here? This is nuts. So he basically tells Joseph, look, get your brothers, send them back to get the rest of your family, bring them here, we'll take care of them, we'll find land for them, we'll put them up and make their life great. And so what ends up happening is that he gives some fancy wagons to Joseph's brothers, and he's like, go back, bring your family, let's make this easy, I'm going to help you all the way because Joseph's been that important to me. And so they go back, and they show up, and they've got like the Mercedes wagons, and everyone's looking like, where do these guys, I've only seen posters of those. I've never seen a real one. And but they tell their father, Jacob, they're like, Joseph's alive, and we saw him, and he's the one that sent us on this wild goose chase. But now he says, Pharaoh and him, they're tight, they're buds. They're like, come on down to Egypt and we'll take care of you. And you can imagine how this probably sounds to Jacob because he hasn't seen Joseph. And he's like, I don't know. This sounds weird. But then he looks at the wagons and he's like, well, I don't know where you would have got the Mercedes wagons if you hadn't actually, some of this must be true. So he prays about it, and Jacob decides, all right, we're going to do it. We're going to go to Egypt. They go to Egypt, and they take the whole family, which, if you can imagine at this time, a whole family, there's many, many sons, and so wives and children and grandchildren. This is like, it's not just like everybody hops in the minivan and they drive to Egypt. This is a whole, movement of people and livestock and lives and tents and everything just has to come with them. And so it takes them a while, and Pharaoh gives them a land called Goshen. And this is a place that scholars think it was somewhere on the eastern Nile River Delta, but they're pretty sure that it was fertile, that this was like good ground. This was a place where you could live well, you could raise crops, you could raise livestock. And so they head down to Egypt, and when they're arriving, when they're coming close, Joseph just can't wait to see his dad. And I want to share a couple verses with you, because Joseph, I don't know, there's moments in this story that are almost cinematic when you read them. You know, we've watched this movie, right, where like they're separated. For me, it was Homeward Bound. Did anybody, when you're a kid, you know, like the dogs and cat that are like lost, and they're trying to find their family and get back to them, you know? And there's always that moment in those types of movies where it's like, you know, they're desperate, they're yelling for them, they can't find them, and then all of a sudden they look up and it's like slow motion, you know, they're like running toward you and they embrace. And so I want to share these moments with you because I think it really humanizes the story, but it also gives us a better sense of like what was really lost, you know, that Joseph, you know, his brothers really stole a life from him that he never got to have. And so this is what happened. It says in verse 29 of Genesis 46 that Joseph harnessed his chariot. So he knows they're getting close. They're getting, you know, toward Goshen. It says he went up to meet his father Israel in Goshen. And when he met him, he hugged his neck and wept on his neck for quite some time. And Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." And there's a moment a little bit later, because by this time Joseph has his own family, and Israel, or Jacob, you know, he's never met Joseph's family. He didn't think Joseph was even alive. And so there's this moment where he meets Joseph's sons. And this is in a couple chapters later, in 48, verse 8. It says, when Israel saw Joseph's sons, he asked, "Who are these?" And Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons God has given me in this place." And his father said, "Bring them to me so I may bless them." Now Israel's eyes were failing because of his age, and he was not able to see well. So Joseph brought his sons near to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see you again, but now God has allowed me to see your children as well." There's this beautiful reunion, and the son that was lost, the son that was presumed to be dead, has now returned, and the father who has mourned and never expected to see him again looks upon the faces of his grandchildren. We don't get a lot more details about Jacob. He lives out the rest of his life there in Egypt, in Goshen. And when he's about to die, he makes Joseph promise that he wants to be buried back in Canaan with like where his father was buried and where his grandfather Abraham was buried. And this was common, like to have like family tombs, or sometimes they were caves, and it was like, but it was meaningful to him. And so he requests to Joseph and to his sons, like, "Hey, when I die, take my body back there and bury me in the family tomb." And so he does. He dies, and Joseph honors his request. And Joseph goes and takes his father's body, and he puts it back, and then he's on his way back. And this is kind of, if you will, the last, for me, this is sort of like the final conclusion of Joseph's story. And it comes to us in the way of his relationship with his brothers, right? Because we see earlier that he has, you know, forgiven them, that he receives them again, but his brothers are kind of not sure that that's real. And they're not sure that, you know, there's at least a part of them, and we're going to read this in a second, that thinks, you know, he's not going to try anything when dad's alive, right? This is sort of like if you grew up in a big family, and like your parents stop at the grocery store and they're like, "We're just going to run in for a second," and they go in for a second, and you're like, that's a moment where you can swat your brother if you want to, right? But as soon as mom or dad or whoever gets back in the car, it's like, oh, now we're not, now we can't behave like that. Like, we're done with that behavior. And then as soon as they turn their head, you're like, bam, get him again. This is how Joseph's brothers, they're like, look, he's not going to do anything while dad's alive. He's not going to try anything because he respects dad too much. But now that dad's gone, what's going to happen? So this is what we're told in Genesis chapter 50. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph bears a grudge and wants to repay us in full for the harm we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph, right? Joseph is coming back from taking his father's body home, and they send word to him when he's on his way back. They're like, hey, by the way, your father gave us these instructions before he died. They're totally making this up, by the way. He didn't do this. But they're like, hey, we're going to invoke dad's voice, even though he's not around to use it. Tell Joseph this: please forgive the sin of your brothers and the wrong that they did to you when they treated you so badly. Now please forgive the sin of the servants of the God of your father. So they even bring God into it a little bit, right? They're like, we're just God's servants. And obviously, dad, he told us to tell you, don't do anything to us, forgive us, leave us alone. This is this reminds me of when they first got rid of Joseph, right? Because at that point they were like, but what are we going to tell dad? And they're like, well, we better make up a story. And so they actually made up a story. They brought back the fancy coat that Joseph had, and they shredded it up, and they dipped it in goat's blood so it looked like he'd been attacked by an animal. And they're like, yeah, Dad, we don't know what happened to Joseph, but look, we found the coat, and I think it would be hard to survive whatever happened here. And we almost see a window into these brothers that even though they've grown a little bit, they haven't grown all the way. Because when it comes to self-preservation, they're willing to make up a lie if it helps them out, if it saves their butt. But this is the moment where we're going to find out what's really in Joseph's heart. We see here a little bit what's in the brother's heart, but what's in Joseph's heart? Because it's possible that vengeance is in his heart. Maybe he was just biding his time so he could bring the hammer down once dad was gone. Is it vengeance and retribution in his heart? Is it mercy and forgiveness? It goes on to say this: when this message was reported to him, Joseph wept. See, when he hears this, he's like, they still don't trust me. They still don't believe me. And then his brothers also came, and they threw themselves down before him. And they said, here we are. We're your slaves. And I can only imagine they're wondering, what's the worst he could do? And they're like, he could do some pretty bad stuff. And so what if we just volunteer to be a slave? Dude, we'll literally do your laundry for the rest of your life, Joseph, if you just, don't do worse than that to us. Don't kill us. Don't throw us in prison. And so they're kind of bargaining with him. But Joseph answered them and said, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant to harm me, but God intended it for good, so he could preserve the lives of many people, as you can see this day. So now don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your little children. Then he consoled them and spoke kindly to them. There's a quote from John Chrysostom. It said, mercy imitates God and disappoints the devil. Mercy imitates God and disappoints the devil. Joseph's brothers were expecting justice. They were expecting an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. They were waiting to be repaid evil because they knew they had done evil. Maybe he would throw them in prison. Maybe he would take their life away like they had taken his life away. Isaac of Nineveh said, "Mercy is opposed to justice. Justice is when someone returns an equal measure to his neighbor. But mercy is a sorrow and a pity stirred up by grace. Mercy belongs only to the perfect." I love Joseph's answer where he says, am I in the place of God? It brings up the question, right? What is God? Is God justice or is God mercy? And sometimes when I read this, what I've heard and what, how it comes across is like, am I in the place of God? Like, I'm not going to punish you. Trust me, God's going to do a good job of that. Right? This is the sort of like, wait till your father gets home kind of conversation. You're not going to get it now, but someday you're going to get it. And God's going to do a lot worse than I could do. And sometimes that's kind of our belief about God. Like, that's what we think God is like. But I don't think so. That idea is out there, right? That God tells us, you need to forgive and forget, but I'm going to remember and punish. God tells us to show mercy, but he's going to repay. God tells us to love our enemies, but he's going to destroy his enemies. God tells us not to live eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, but vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, right? Is God justice or mercy? There's clues in Scripture, if we'll see them. In the Beatitudes, right, Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." And in Luke 6, he goes on to say this. He says, "If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you?" Sometimes I'm like, we don't even need sermons. We could just read a verse like this and we could all repent. You know what I mean? "For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to be repaid, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners so that they may be repaid in full. But love your enemies and do good and lend expecting nothing back. Then your reward will be great. But someday I'll get all of them back for you. Because that's who I am. And even if you forget, I won't." No. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, because he is kind to ungrateful and evil people. Be merciful, because I expect you to do it, even though I won't. No, be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. See, too often as Christians, we're kind of like Jonah. And I'm not going to give you the whole story. Jonah was a prophet. Yeah. VeggieTales, come on. But he never got it? Oh, come on. Okay. But anyway, here's the thing. Jonah was sent to Nineveh because Nineveh was a wicked city. And he ran and he did the fish thing where he got swallowed and he was 3 days, 3 nights, all that stuff. Eventually he gets there and he preaches to them, and lo and behold, they actually repented. And so after they repent, Jonah goes up on a hill that overlooks the whole city. And he sits down. And he sits there and he watches and he waits. Because he's like, oh man, the fireworks are going to be good. God's about to rain down fire from heaven. And I'm not talking about the Pentecostal fire. I'm talking about the destruction, damnation, hellfire. And Joseph can't wait. Or not Joseph, sorry. Jonah can't wait. They're both J's. He can't wait. He's like, come on, let it burn. He's got his marshmallow bag there, and he's putting them on the end of the stick. And it doesn't happen. And he starts to get a little bit irritated. Hey, God, I'm here for the show. This is what it says in Scripture. It won't be on the screen. You'll just have to listen. This displeased Jonah terribly, and he became very angry. And then he prayed to the Lord and said, oh, Lord, this is just what I thought would happen when I was in my own country. This is why I tried to prevent by attempting to escape to Tarshish. Because I knew you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in mercy, and one who relents concerning threatened judgment. So now, Lord, kill me instead, because I would rather die than live. He's a little dramatic. I mean, come on. I don't think you really mean that. The Lord said, are you really so very angry? Sometimes as Christians, we long for sinners to be punished. Do I long for people that have hurt me, who have wronged me, who have mistreated me to get what's coming to them? Does that live in my heart? Because I have to be honest, yeah, sometimes it does, a lot of times. Or do I look on them with compassion because I am one of them? I'm someone who has hurt others, who has wronged others. And I've experienced the mercy of Jesus. Nathaniel of Chicago, which is just a cool name, says this: we live in a mercy-starved society where the spirit of vengeance and vindictiveness saturates the air we breathe, poisoning relationships in our cities, our workplaces, and our families. In addition, existing social structures often eclipse people's experience of mercy and further weaken our capacity for offering it. This famine of mercy is no small matter. A famine of mercy. Think about that. For it is in receiving and imitating God's mercy that we find a source of ultimate hope and a way of engaging with our neighbor that can move us beyond divisions, beyond prejudice, beyond animosity, and beyond the status quo. In today's mercy-starved world, we are called to increase our effort and to pray that mercy would more fully shape our thoughts and words and actions in fulfillment of the Lord saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I grew up in a musical family, and my mom was a music teacher. My grandparents were both music teachers. My sister became a music teacher. And we watched musicals. So if you don't do that, I'm sorry. But there was a musical, there's a musical called Les Mis, and it's actually spelled Les Miserables, but it's just Les Mis. For some reason, we don't pronounce most of the word. But there's a moment in this movie, and the movie, musical, play, it's all of those things. But there's this moment where there's this man who is a criminal, and his name is Jean Valjean. And he has, he's been in prison, and he's finally released from prison after 19 years that he's spent in prison. And you can imagine how 19 years in prison would harden a person, would make them altered. He was thrown in prison for stealing bread, but after repeated escape attempts, he just became a hardened, bitter person. And everywhere he goes, people know that he's a convict, and so he's not getting a lot of opportunities, and he's becoming desperate. And finally, there's a bishop who takes him in and offers him food and lets him stay in his house and sleep in a bed. And nobody else will. They just see a convict, but this man sees a human. And during the night, Valjean wakes up and he sneaks down, and he had seen when they ate the silverware that the bishop had. And so he takes the silverware because he knows it's worth money, and he steals it and he leaves in the middle of the night. He's caught, and the police bring him back to the bishop, and here he is. He's got a bag full of all of the bishop's silverware. He's completely dead to rights. I mean, he's sitting there holding the stolen goods. And the priest or the bishop, he's kind of, he was unaware that this was happening, but now he sees it. He sees what's going on. And he does something kind of shocking. He tells the police that the silver was a gift. I mean, here's the man in front of him who he offered kindness to when no one else would. And that man took his kindness and spit in his face and stole from him. But he stands there and he says, no, the silver was a gift. And then he looks over and there's some silver candlesticks there. And he says, but why did you forget to take the candlesticks that I gave you as well? And so he takes the candlesticks and he puts them in Valjean's bag, and he says, sorry I had to remind you that you forgot these. It's an act of radical mercy. And it cuts through Valjean's bitterness and his hardness. And it touches his heart. And it becomes a turning point in his life. And from that point on, he uses the money that he takes from the silver, and he buys a new identity. And he goes to a new place, and he sets up a business, and he becomes a successful businessman, and eventually becomes the mayor of the town where he has his business. And anyone that would see him now would not recognize him as the hardened criminal because of the way that it changed his life. And everything that came later, in fact, he becomes someone who then shows mercy. And he ends up adopting an orphan, and he raises her as his daughter. But this is what the priest said to him when he's caught in the act, and he gives him the candlesticks, but then he pulls him close and he says, Valjean, my brother, you belong no longer to evil, but to good. It is your soul that I am buying for you. I withdraw it from black thoughts and from the spirit of perdition, and I give it to God. See, there's something about mercy instead of vengeance, instead of retribution, that purchases a new path. And in this story, it purchases a new life. And Joseph's mercy on his brothers purchased a new future, a new life, where he had a family that was restored to him when he could have exiled them and he could have punished them. And Jesus' mercy, in the same way, purchases a new life for each of us. If we'll leave our old life and receive the mercy of Christ, it purchases a new life. What is justice anyway? I want you to think about this. It was put to me this way, and it was helpful because I saw it from a different angle. But if someone murders your son, imagine you have a child and someone murders them. What is justice? To see the person who took your son from you punished. But at the end of the day, does that bring back my son? Now we have two fathers who have no sons, right? We have two mothers with no sons. And honestly, like in our best attempts as humans and our effort to keep order and to have law that we can live in. I understand our limitations in justice. But God's not limited by our ideas of justice. And true justice would be that I would actually get my son back, right? That's what would make everything equal again. Instead of having 2 sons taken away, we would have 2 sons given back, and reconciliation happening between them would create true justice. But that would take resurrection, right? Do we know anybody who does that? There are echoes of this in Joseph's response to his brothers. As for you, you meant to harm me, but God intended it for a good purpose, so he could preserve the lives of many, as you see this day. The thing that caused harm was resurrected to create good. The son, Joseph, who was dead, is now alive. His life has preserved the lives of others, those dying from hunger. And those who caused him harm have been reconciled to the one that they harmed. This is a picture of God's justice. But it all started with mercy, not vengeance. Of course, if you're going to preach on a subject like mercy, God will give you an opportunity to walk it out. And we had some new neighbors moved in recently, and they brought a sort of petting zoo with them. And included in the petting zoo was somewhere between 60 and 80 guinea pigs that they turned loose. And so we went out to our yard to find guinea pigs under every board and in every tall grass and burrowing under the shed. And mercy is right. Let's just put it this way. My kids liked it more than I did. And my wife liked that my kids liked it, although I struggled to get to that space. And I felt frustrated with my neighbor, right? As one would. You feel like it's not a great way to start out our relationship here, And now it's inconvenienced me. I'm out there cleaning my yard up and trying to get every place they could hide taken care of and trying to catch them and remove them before they damage something. And before they reproduce, right? Because I think that can turn into a lot more guinea pigs fast. And my wife had to remind me just to relax a little bit. And but it bears the question, right? Like, will I ever have a better chance to demonstrate actually loving my neighbor than when I've been harmed? And we called what we thought could be like animal control, and they were like, yeah, we're not going to deal with that, but you can call the sheriff. And so my only recourse was like, take this burden on yourself or start your neighbor relationship off by calling the sheriff on them. And the law would have been on my side. But will I ever have a better chance to demonstrate loving my neighbor than when I have been harmed and the law is on my side and I could exercise that authority, but instead choose mercy? And it's comical to imagine me with a net running around my yard trying to catch guinea pigs. And it doesn't compare to many of the things that you have suffered. And there may be many in your life, in your family, in your work, and band you can come, in your school, in your neighborhood that need your mercy and need our mercy to start the process of God's redemptive work. Just to go back to the end of the quote from Nathaniel, that in today's mercy-starved world, we are called to increase our effort and to pray that mercy would more fully shape our thoughts and words and actions in fulfillment of the Lord's saying, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Will you stand with me? I'm going to pray over us in a moment. And just invite the same way that an incredible amount of good and many, many lives were saved in Joseph's story through hardship and suffering and pain, through trauma, through being a victim, but persevering. When I look out at this room, I know that each of us probably have some story that we could tell. And when you can imagine what kind of good came out of one life of Joseph, how much more good could come out of the many lives that are represented here in this room? If we will choose mercy, if we will choose to see God as with us even when things are difficult, and if we will receive that presence and persevere in doing good and not repaying evil for evil. So Jesus, thank you for each person. Thank you for each life and each story. Thank you for all the neighbors that are near to us. For the family, for the friends, for those who are close to us, and whoever in our life it is that we in our flesh wish that they would get theirs, that they would get what was coming to them. I pray that you would grow mercy in our hearts, that mercy would rise up, and that we become a people of mercy, and that we would see your justice, not our justice, not punishment and more destruction, but healing and wholeness and salvation. We ask this in your name. Amen. Take a moment, say hi to somebody nearby. If you don't recognize them, if you don't know their name, introduce yourself. Say hello. If you're uncomfortable with that, give them a fake name. And then we can move forward for communion. It was the suffering of Jesus, the greatest act of mercy ever, that makes a way for us to have a new life. And so receive that newness today. If you're new with us, you don't have to be a member or anything to partake in communion. You can come up, and it's really just an act of faith in Christ. And so if you want to do that, come on and join us.